Hello everybody. Roger says hey. Scarlett would say hey too, but she's currently on the floor beneath my chair. So today we've got a bit of a military themed video. We're going to be learning about a Soviet superplane that apparently rattled America. I don't know if I've heard of it before. I'm not sure what plane they're going to be talking about, but I'm assuming it's going to be set in the Cold War. Now this video was a Patreon request from Nikolai Ivanovich. I hope that's how you say your name. So I appreciate it, Nikolai. And this video is also from the channel Real Engineering, and I don't think I've ever done any videos from this channel before. So I think it'll be cool to get to see a new channel and kind of how they do their videos. I always enjoy learning about aircraft and Air Force stuff. It's one of my favorite branches of the military. I have done some previous videos on the Vulcan bomber and the different V planes that the British Air Force came up with. So it'll be pretty cool now to shift focus over to the Soviet Union and see what sort of planes and technology they had. So let's get into it.
This episode of Real Engineering is brought to you by Brilliant, a problem-solving website that teaches you to think like an engineer. At the height of the Cold War, with nuclear anxiety at a fever pitch, the United States launched their first spy satellites, the Corona, tasked with photographing deep inside the Soviet Union. US intelligence was...
That name didn't hold up very well, did it?
At a fever pitch, the United States launched their first spy satellites, the Corona, tasked with photographing deep inside the Soviet Union. US intelligence was focused on searching for signs of nuclear weapon development and testing, but found a lot more than they bargained for. These early satellites were launched with rolls of film with no way of transmitting the data contained within them to Earth through electronic means, and thus the film had to be recovered and developed here on Earth. Once the film was filled, the satellite would eject a re-entry vehicle containing the precious undeveloped photos back to Earth, where they could be caught by a passing plane as they drifted down.
My gosh, can you imagine that they had to go through all of that difficulty just to get pictures back. And think about how easy it is today. It's just a little bit of data that you send over. I don't know how you send data. I guess radio, or I'm not sure how it works exactly, how you get data from satellites. But just think about how simple it is today, just in our everyday lives. And back then, they had to do like a whole ocean dump just to get a picture. It's crazy.
Back to Earth, where they could be caught by a passing plane as they drifted down. On one such mission, a strange object began to emerge from the Caspian Sea as the film developed. A gigantic aircraft, nearly 100 meters long, with short stubby wings, much too short to fly like a conventional aircraft. US intelligence had never seen anything like it. As they received more pictures, it was clear the craft was moving at the same speed as a traditional aircraft, while outsizing even the largest of modern-day American military planes like the Lockheed C-5M. It was even emblazoned with the flag of the Soviet Navy, not the Soviet Air Force. This discovery set alarm bells off within US intelligence. Had the Soviets developed a breakthrough in propulsion which could give them the upper hand in naval combat? Confused on what they were seeing, the US dubbed the machine the Caspian Sea Monster, but the Soviets weren't developing a gigantic hydrofoil or seaplane. This giant aircraft secretly being developed was actually an ekranoplan, a gigantic vessel capable of skimming across the ocean surface at high speeds. In 1962, the Central Hydrofoil Design Bureau assigned chief designer Rostislav Alexiev to begin working on a prototype plane. Alexiev had cut his teeth developing hydrofoil planes like the Raketa. These craft can easily be defined as a boat. They used a hydrofoil, essentially a wing designed to act in water, to lift the boat's hull out of the water as it gained speed, allowing it to reduce drag and increase top speeds. But the Soviets wanted to take this a step further. The ekranoplan would make use of something called ground effect to fly at a very low altitude above the ocean's surface. Ground effect occurs when a fixed-wing aircraft flies at an altitude less than the length of its wingspan. As large masses of air come into contact with the aircraft, the profile of the wing deflects the air downwards, compressing the air between the wing and the ground. This trapped air can cause an area of higher than normal pressure under the wing, resulting in a boost to lift. This happens with all aircraft during takeoff and landing, and is something all pilots have to learn to deal with. For example, some planes can get off the ground when overloaded, but won't be able to climb past the altitude where ground effect is in play. Ekranoplans are designed in such a way to maximize this effect and never leave the ground effect zone. Just as our plane can get off the ground when overloaded, the Ekranoplan can be heavier without the need for extra power. An aircraft with this ability could be a powerful tool in open sea combat. It would fly under enemy radar for much longer due to the radar shadow under the Earth's curvature. It would be capable of transporting tons of equipment and personnel quickly while avoiding enemy mines and torpedoes. Or it could be fitted with weapons of its own to quickly attack enemy ships before escaping.
What in the world? I've never seen anything like this before. I didn't even know these things existed. This is crazy. Because you just think about naval warfare as just boats, right? Ships. You don't think about this stuff. I mean, what happened? Like, I feel like we don't hear about stuff like this. So this must have. I mean, either I'm just completely unaware of, that this stuff does exist, or it was kind of a fad that faded out over time for some reason. I guess maybe they'll explain more about that as the video goes on. But can you imagine just having... Can you imagine that this is naval warfare with just planes, flying around everywhere on the surface? I mean, the speed at which they could probably attack a ship is crazy. I don't know if naval ships have the ability to attack something that's moving that quickly. I'm not sure how the naval war weapons are designed. I would imagine they're designed for more stationary or slower moving targets, with the exception of planes that might come in and try and bomb them. But I mean, again, you're aiming at something that's flying above you, not skimming on the surface of the water. So I'm not sure how that would work. But man, this is insane.
Imagine if a vehicle like this was available for the D-Day landings, the largest amphibious assault in history. The Allies would have been able to transport tons of equipment and troops across the channel in a 15-minute trip. The appeal of the technology was enormous, and the first prototype, named the KM, was built and secretly transported to the Caspian Sea to begin testing. This enormous vehicle instantly became the largest aircraft ever built, with a wingspan of 37.6 meters and a length of 92 meters. It weighed a massive 240 tons, but it could take off with almost double that. Powered by 8 Dobrynin VD7 turbojets mounted at the front and 2 on the tail, which provided a total of 1,275 kilonewtons of thrust, about 30% more than a Boeing 747. The first test flight of the KM took place on the 16th of October 1966, with chief designer Alexiev on board. At the time...
So what are these barrels right here? I guess those are weapons, maybe? That would shoot out missiles or something like that?
1966, with chief designer Alexiev on board. At the time, it was forbidden for Soviet aircraft designers to be on board test vehicles like this, in case they were involved in an accident. But test pilot Vladimir Loganov lobbied for Alexiev to be on board to allow him to experience and refine his designs. The first tests were successful, showing the KM could fly with optimum fuel efficiency at 430 kilometers per hour and with a maximum operational speed of 500 kilometers per hour.
Can you use this effect? I forgot what it was called, but this effect of this air compressing underneath the vessel. Could you do that like on streets? Like, could you design cars to maneuver like this as well? And that would become kind of like your futuristic type of hover car. I mean, I would imagine that they've probably already thought about that and maybe have experimented with it or whatever. But I'm just thinking, like, what's the next car gonna be? Getting it off the road, getting it off wheels, and using something more sophisticated like this to get around. I mean, we have enough car accidents as it is. I'm not sure this is probably safe necessarily for most people to drive using this method, but I don't know. You never know. Like, what is it going to be like 200 years from now?
During some high-speed tests, it's claimed that it achieved a speed of 650 kilometers per hour. The KM was a valuable proof of concept and laid the groundwork for all future Ekranoplans. Alexiev took the lessons learned and began to develop a new transport version designed specifically for the transport of military equipment and troops, called the Orleanok. This was a much smaller variant, 58 meters long with a 31.5 meter wingspan and a maximum takeoff weight of 140 metric tons. Its engine layout was fascinating, with a massive NK-12 turboprop engine mounted on the tail as far away from the salt water as possible. These massive 6-meter diameter counter-rotating turbo propellers developed 11,000 kilowatts of power, making it the most powerful turboprop engine to ever enter service. It also featured 2 nose-mounted turbofan engines with air intakes on top of the nose to minimize water intake. The exhaust of these engines were pointed under the wings to enhance the ground effect phenomenon by bolstering the air cushion with the high-pressure output of the jet engine. These engines were only needed on takeoff before the plane could gain the speed needed to develop enough lift through the wing and ground effect. Once this was achieved, they were shut down to decrease fuel consumption. The Orleanoc featured a nose-mounted cargo door and wheels to allow the plane to drive onto land and unload. This was a fully functional Ekranoplan and actually entered and remained in service until 1993, although...
It looks like it's like scraping along the ground, like that's it's really odd looking.
Ekranoplan and actually entered and remained in service until 1993, although only 4 were ever built. Details...
That's also really interesting how it opens like that, where the nose of the plane just kind of folds at a 90-degree angle and you can get into the bay of the plane like that. I've never seen that before either. This is really interesting engineering, really interesting design right here.
Service until 1993, although only 4 were ever built. Details from here vary, and I found it difficult to find an authoritative source of information on what happened to Alexeyev after the development of the Orleanoc was complete. Some say he crashed in the KM, others in the Orleanoc, and others say he crashed in a Volga 2, a small passenger transport Ekranoplan. But they all seem to point towards Alexeyev being fired as chief designer as a result and dying a short time later. Whether that was from injuries from the crash or natural causes, I have no idea. With Alexeyev out of the picture and the Soviet Union on the brink of collapse, development of Ekranoplans in the Soviet Union slowly began to fizzle out. They managed to develop a slightly smaller version of the KM designed to launch anti-ship missiles while out at sea. In 1987, the first version of this vehicle was built and named the Lun. This vehicle weighed 286 tons, had a length of 74 meters, and a wingspan of 44 meters. The tail-mounted engines were removed completely. It was instead powered by 8 NK-87 turbofans mounted on the front of the craft, each producing 127 kilonewtons of thrust.
So those are fans, not missile launchers. The missile launchers would be on the back of this plane. Now the other one I don't think had those, so I think that's just for this newer model right here. I think, I don't know, maybe it did.
The Lun entered the Soviet Navy in 1987. However, with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, only one model was ever completed, and it remains in its dry dock on the shores of the Caspian Sea to this day.
Really?
The idea of a wing and ground effect plane has its merits, but it has simply never found its niche in any military. The Germans made a smaller Ekranoplan in the 70s called the X-114, but it never made it into service.
What in the world? That is the weirdest looking plane I've ever seen in my life. It almost looks like a throwback that on the tail of it, that horizontal piece, it almost reminds me of like the very first planes that you would have seen like in the early 20th century. This is a really interesting design too. Oh my gosh.
The Chinese also experimented with an Ekranoplan called the XTW-4, which was built in 1999 and went through multiple tests a year later. The vehicle was once spotted in a Chinese shipping port on Google Maps, but has since vanished. While in 2002, Boeing presented their plans to build the largest Ekranoplan ever, dubbed the Pelican. They claimed the craft would be longer than a football field and capable of hauling 17 M1 Abrams tanks across an ocean. But the US Congress rejected the plans in 2005. There just wasn't a need for such a plane.
Now that design is very interesting too. That almost looks futuristic. I've noticed that the wings though on these things are very different from your typical plane, which I'm sure has to do with the the way that the air works with the craft as well. They look like they're all like kind of pointed downwards. So I mean, I don't understand the engineering behind it. I'm not a physicist, but yeah, it's interesting.
The plans in 2005, there just wasn't a need for such a plane. Wing in ground effect planes may yet find their niche, but for now, safety and reliability concerns are its primary roadblock. Flying at such a low altitude provides very little time for corrective maneuvers, and poor weather with high waves or wind prevents any ekranoplan from operating. Some have sought to develop smaller passenger versions like the A050, which the Russian Embassy of South Africa, your definitive Russian news source, claimed it would be ready for service in the next 3 years. Vehicles like this could find a valuable niche in archipelago regions like Southeast Asia, where increasing wealth and populations, combined with relatively short distances between islands, could provide a market for these temperamental craft. However, traditional planes will always remain a much more efficient and reliable form of transport over long distances, as flying in the lower density air of the upper atmosphere drastically decreases drag. So, these passenger versions would have to operate extremely short-haul distances where airliners waste time during climbing and ascent. This technology is perfectly viable for the right application, and we may yet see someone solve the problem and build a successful business from it. That could be you, but you will first have to learn how to solve problems. A good place to start is through...
I don't know if this is CGI footage or if these are real planes or not. These are pretty cool looking as well, and I'm not sure. They almost look like the Chinese design that he showed, but Alright, well that definitely was way different than what I was expecting. I was expecting a more traditional plane that flew in the air, kind of maybe threatened the US during the Soviet Union, but that's not what this was about at all. This was a really cool, interesting thing to learn about for sure. And as they got into, you know, later in the video, yeah, it definitely looked like it was one of those technologies that seemed like a good idea, but in practicality it just didn't work as well as they thought it would. So I can understand why I've never heard of this before. But it is interesting to think about that technology and if there is an application for it somewhere, whether it's in the military or in the civilian world. Like I said with the cars, like I don't know if you could make a car that flies like that kind of on land. I don't know if it has to be over water for that to work, or if you can do that on land or not. It does seem a lot more dangerous though, you know, because you have the surface right there. So if you just did something the wrong way and you hit the surface, I mean, you're probably going to crash. So it does seem like something that might take a more skilled pilot, and you know, I don't know if the general population is ready for that or not. Yeah, it's really interesting to think about though. It's really nice to learn about a technology and even some science that I was completely unaware of before. So I appreciate it, Nikolai, for suggesting this video for me. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't done that yet. If you're interested in any of my social media, or if you want to check out my Patreon, the links to all of that stuff is in the description of the video and my pinned comment. I also have a P.O. box address in the description if you are looking for that. But we'll have more military themed stuff coming up on this channel. I really enjoy learning about it, so make sure you stay tuned for all of that stuff. And Roger, Scarlett, and I will see you next time.